The shimmering heat haze of the North African desert has a way of playing tricks on the mind. But the British soldiers peering through their binoculars were certain of what they were seeing. Approaching them was not a standard infantry formation, but a blur of motion that looked more like a traveling circus than a military unit. The enemy soldiers were running, not marching, but maintaining a brisk high-step jog, and on their heads, bouncing rhythmically with every stride, were massive clusters of black capercaillie feathers. To the hardened desert rats of the British Eighth Army, the sight was comical. It seemed to confirm every stereotype of the Italian military: theatrical, obsessed with style over substance, and woefully out of place in modern mechanized warfare. Jokes rippled through the British trenches. They looked like peacocks, they looked like clowns. Surely men who wore plumage into battle were not to be feared. But as the distance closed, the laughter died in the soldiers' throats. Those feathers were not a sign of vanity. They were the badge of the Bersaglieri's high-velocity marksmen. And when those clowns hit the British lines with the ferocity of cornered lions, wielding bayonets and throwing grenades with terrifying precision, the British realized too late that they weren't facing peacocks. They were facing one of the most lethal, physically conditioned, and fanatically brave fighting forces of World War II. The cult of the run origins of the best. To understand the terror the Bersaglieri eventually inspired in North Africa, one must understand the philosophy that forged them. Founded in 1836 by General Alessandro La Marmora, the Bersaglieri marksmen were created to be the ultimate light infantry. La Marmora wanted soldiers who could move faster than cavalry and strike harder than regular infantry. His training regimen was brutal and eccentric. Physical fitness was not just encouraged, it was a religion. The defining trait of the Bersaglieri was the passo di corsa, a rapid jog of 180 steps per minute. They were forbidden to walk during parades or maneuvers. They had to run. This was not for show. In an era before trucks, this allowed them to deploy rapidly across battlefields, seizing key positions before the enemy could react. The famous feathers, the piumetto originating from the capercaillie bird, also had a practical purpose. They were intended to shade the marksman's shooting eye from the sun and camouflage the head in foliage. Over time, however, they became a symbol of elite status, worn with an aggressive tilt over the right ear. By the time World War II arrived, the Bersaglieri had traded their bicycles for motorcycles and trucks, but the spirit of the Corsa remained. They were shock troops, trained to act independently, move aggressively, and fight with a dash of recklessness that bordered on suicidal. Into the crucible. The North African theater. The North African campaign is often remembered through the lens of the German Afrika Korps and the genius of Erwin Rommel. The narrative frequently dismisses the Italian contribution, citing the poor equipment, lack of motivation, and strategic blunders of the Italian high command. While true for much of the regular army, this generalization collapsed when applied to the Bersaglieri. When the war in the desert turned against Italy in 1940 and 1941, it was the Bersaglieri regiments that were thrown into the breach to stop the British advance. The British soldiers, comfortable in their superiority over the average Italian conscript, were unprepared for the Bersaglieri's aggression. In the fluid, chaotic battles of the desert where there were no natural defenses and movement was life, the Bersaglieri thrived. They were masters of mobile warfare. One of the first rude awakenings came during the early skirmishes in Libya. British units, expecting Italians to surrender at the first sign of armor, found themselves swarmed by Bersaglieri infantry who refused to yield. Lacking effective anti-tank weapons, Bersaglieri soldiers were known to leap onto British tanks, attempting to pry open hatches or shove grenades into viewports. It was a terrifying display of raw courage against steel. The German soldier has impressed the world. The greatest testament to the Bersaglieri did not come from Italian propaganda, but from their allies and enemies. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, was notoriously critical of his Italian allies' leadership. He was frustrated by their logistical failures and cautious generals. However, his view of the Bersaglieri was radically different. Rommel frequently attached Bersaglieri units to his own panzer divisions, trusting them with the most dangerous sectors of the front. He saw in them a kindred spirit of aggression. It is widely attributed to Rommel that he said, "The German soldier has impressed the world. However, the Italian Bersaglieri soldier has impressed the German soldier." This respect was earned in blood. The Bersaglieri fought with equipment that was laughably obsolete compared to the British. Their tanks, often the L3 tankettes, were essentially armored lawnmowers with machine guns, useless against British Matildas and Crusaders. Their artillery was outdated, and their supply lines were constantly severed by the Royal Navy. Yet, they compensated with sheer tenacity. In the battle for the Hafia Pass and the defense of the Gazala line, Bersaglieri units held positions under withering artillery fire that would have broken lesser units. They didn't just hold, they counterattacked. The sight of the black feathers bobbing through the smoke became a harbinger of a vicious close-quarters fight. The Lions of El Alamein. The legend of the Bersaglieri was cemented forever in the tragedy of the Second Battle of El Alamein in late 1942. This was the turning point of the war in Africa, where the massive material superiority of the British, led by General Montgomery, finally crushed the Axis forces. Rommel's forces were stretched thin, exhausted, and running out of fuel. The Bersaglieri were deployed in the southern sector of the line, tasked with holding back a massive British thrust. As the British armor rolled forward, expecting a quick breakthrough against the Italians, they hit a wall of fire. The Bersaglieri fought with a desperation that stunned the attackers. Regiments like the 7th, 8th, and 9th Bersaglieri held their ground in foxholes dug into the hard sand, facing down Sherman and Crusader tanks with Molotov cocktails and magnetic mines. There is a poignant historical account of the 9th Bersaglieri Regiment at El Alamein, surrounded, out of water, and out of ammunition. The regiment was decimated. When the British finally overran their positions, they found the bodies of the Bersaglieri lying where they had stood, refusing to retreat even a single step. The final radio message from the Arrogance division, which fought alongside the Bersaglieri to Rommel, is one of the most haunting of the war. Enemy tanks broke through south of Arrogance division. Thus, Arrogance is surrounded. We are located 5 kilometers northwest of Bersaglieri. Arrogance tanks are fighting. They fought until they were annihilated. The British units that cleared the southern sector reported that the resistance was fanatical. The mockery of the feathers had long since vanished, replaced by a somber salute to a worthy adversary. The legacy of the feathers. The Bersaglieri's performance in North Africa challenged the prevailing narrative of Italian military incompetence in World War II. It proved that the failures of the Italian army were failures of leadership, industry, and logistics, not of the soldier's heart. When led well and given a mission, the Bersaglieri were among the finest light infantry in the world. After the surrender in North Africa, the survivors were marched into captivity. Even as prisoners of war, the Bersaglieri maintained their discipline and pride. They had lost the battle, but they had won the moral victory of respect. Today, the Bersaglieri still exist as an elite corps within the modern Italian army. They have served as peacekeepers in Lebanon, Somalia, Bosnia, and Afghanistan, and they still wear the feathers. If you watch a modern Italian military parade, you will see the other units marching in solemn rhythmic unison. Then, the band will strike up a frantic high-tempo brass melody. Suddenly a blur of black feathers will rush past. They do not walk, they run. For the casual observer, it might still look peculiar, grown men running with plumes on their heads. But for those who know their history, particularly the history of the scorching sands of North Africa, there is no laughter. There is only the memory of the desert rats watching the horizon, realizing that the clowns were actually lions, and that the bouncing feathers were not a joke, but a warning. Key takeaways of the Bersaglieri in North Africa. Doctrine of speed. Their tradition of running passo di cosa wasn't just for parades. It translated into high tactical mobility and aggressive flanking maneuvers in the desert. Rommel's favorites. Despite the friction between German and Italian commands, Rommel specifically requested Bersaglieri units for critical defensive and offensive operations. Equipment versus spirit. They fought effectively despite having vastly inferior tanks and anti-tank weaponry compared to the British, relying on courage and close-quarters tactics to bridge the gap. El Alamein stand. Their refusal to retreat during the final collapse of the Axis line at El Alamein remains one of the most heroic last stands of the theater.